How do you do? Mr. Carl Lemley feels it would be a little unkind to present this picture without just a word of friendly warning. I think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. Well, we've warned you.
One random day of primary school, a friend of mine came up to me in the playground and asked if I'd heard of Monster High. That evening, I ran to the family computer to check it out. The next weekend, my mum spent 2 hours waiting in Toys R Us for my first doll to be chosen. Operetta, of course. And I was officially hooked. I don't think I'm over-exaggerating too much when I say that most things about my personality now come back to Monster High. They are so much more to me than pieces of plastic, as my dad might believe. To the point even where I've recollected them at my big age of 21. My mum doesn't understand how something can be so important, but today I want to show how the brand's identities are so significant and individual. Firstly, whenever I tried to talk about Monster High, I was always just told that they were, that. So first and foremost, what makes up a goth? Catherine Spooner has noted that the Gothic was a notable and repeated feature in fashion editorials in the 1990s and 2000s particularly. The Gothic can be spotted by different motifs, but Spooner's notes here highlight two things. 1, goth peaked in the millennium, and 2, this, unfortunately, or fortunately, commercialised it. The features of the Gothic, along with its mercenary practices from industries, can be seen in the museum at FIT's fashion exhibition, Gothic Dark Glamour. The creator of the exhibition, Dr. Valerie Steele, acknowledged the popularity identified with black-clad teenagers, as well as its importance as a theme in contemporary fashion.
It always implies that something is gloomy and macabre.
However, clothes are often gothicized by context. There is a difference between an aesthetic and a practice.
People who were unique, so they had a safe place to come where they wouldn't get picked on for what they looked like.
The product and concept of Monster High, while arguably still capitalizing on the alt scene and market gap,
we actually went shopping with girls to see what they purchase and what they're buying, and we saw the goth trend trickling down.
Contextualizes its designs within the plot and characters of the brand. In Monster High, there lurks something killer, something fierce.
Now we're fierce.
And with the concept of monsters, of fashionable monsters, the reasoning for the unique styles becomes contextualized by the heritage of the brand's characters. The comparison of the Monster High designs to that of the Dark Glamour exhibition illustrate this. Ruined Castle, the first section, has been described as evoking the paradigmatic Gothic settings, and the fashions allude to decay, death, and destruction. It is clear through this description that the purpose of this segment was to tap into the motif of death. Gothic subcultures find sensibilities in the beauty side of decay, and the elegance in the dresses exude that beauty. Draping fabrics and corsetry seek to induce touches of femininity that transforms death into beauty. This is complemented by textures alluding more to the nature of death. Decay and transformation then can perhaps most easily be compared to the ghosts of Monster High. The central ghost, Spectra Vondergeist, was canonically once human, becoming a ghost and enrolling in Monster High after her early demise. There, she's introduced to us by the use of her blog, The Ghostly Gossip. The design elements appear similar to that of the ruined castle. Sheer torn fabric, corsetry, and a silhouette that prioritizes a mass of skirts. Undisputably, there is a feminine beauty and a nod of decay in her image, even without the practical elements of a translucent doll and dead eyes. The difference, of course, is that while the ruined castle focuses on the destruction of death, Spectra celebrates it as a reincarnation.
Let me tell you a story so spooky, but also sad, but really exciting.
Spectra was literally given a new life when she became a ghost. But with her clothes specifically, the ball and chain motif in her designs reference key aspects of Gothic fashion. But the detail of her heel being a ball and chain contradicts its usual purpose to punish sinners and ghosts. Instead, it becomes a support, literally lifting her up. The Ruined Castle section then adheres to the Gothic by taking key aesthetics and leaning on the idea of death, whereas the design of Spectra takes the aesthetic and contextualises it into a personality. The online companion to the exhibition simply describes the laboratory as a place where fashion monsters are created. It's incredibly easy to see the influence from Frankenstein's renditions in the designs, but I would also argue that this concept of creation sees a comparison to Rebecca Steam, another creation of another mad scientist. Designer Kei Agama created the designs found in the laboratory, fusing a Victorian aesthetic with steampunk, forming perhaps a visual antithesis of peak Gothic fiction and the Victorian threat of the Industrial Revolution. Many of the designs appear incomplete or under construction. This alludes to the horror found in the stories of the mad scientist, the threat of what's to come, the unknown for both him and the reader, and the intangibility of the monster he will inevitably create. The fabrics remain plain, bar some attachments which are made of unconventional material that pull and squeeze the fabrics and mannequins. This reshapes them into what the creator desires. Rebecca Steam serves as Monster High's key representative of the inventor's product. Likewise to Agama's aesthetic, Rebecca's design emulates steampunk. And so, the laboratory rightfully analyses the fear and horror from Gothic texts, while Rebecca's goggles, metallic, so-called skin, and engine boots depict her as a fashionista with an interest in the weird. Like Spectra, she was also given a second chance, this time after being rebuilt, and she also used it for good. Here, the aesthetic of the doll seems central to the narrative, with Monster High combining Gothic references with understandings of subcultures to create their characters. The goth scene has been documented to have been originated in the Batcave, a nightclub in London, which is where our final section's name originated from. Focusing on the fashion of the modern Gothic scene, the Batcave at the exhibition sees contemporary Gothic styles and notes the inspirational subcultural anecdotes. The Batcave firstly addresses the Gothic's roots in punk. A male model is adorned in a thick leather jacket, covered in patches and sporting neon dreads, while the girl's fashion becomes a blend of styles, but stomper boots, torn fabric and wild hair again allude to the punk era. Deuce Gorgon seems to fulfill this punk reference in Monster High's first wave of characters.
Dude, babe. Yo, Cleo, what's going on?
Deuce!
Clearly, there is an extremely close correlation between these two designs, the other main punk being Venus McFlytrap. I believe eco-punk inspired the punk design of Venus, as being a plant monster makes environmental consideration in her nature. No pun intended. She also sports a torn patched jacket, presumably handmade, chunky boots where, as Deuce's snake Mohawk did, the grin of a monster literally threatens passers-by. And most significantly, the bright streaks and iconic shaved hair are a perfect marker of the punk aesthetic. However, these bright colours used in her hair can also be compared to the wigs on the mannequins. Dreads, ribbons, backcombing and hair dye, especially when they're all lined up like this, accumulate in a way representing the amalgamation of Y2K old styles. The exhibition then can be used as a comparative figure, as I have, to decipher the Gothic, due to its interest in many styles. But I'll still argue that the exhibition doesn't connect to the Gothic and Gothic characters in the same way as Monster High. Monster High actually seeks to connect with a movement, its experiences and its characters, and then it justifies the uses of these aesthetics in a way to connect to the characters, to the styles, and therefore the audiences.
Sublime!
It's obvious, though, that the exhibition did open up to celebrate a style that was different from the norm. And if we go to the doll world, the norm is, of course...
Hi, Barbie.
Hi, Barbie! Hi, Barbie!
Hi, Barbie.
Hi, Barbie!
Hi, Ken.
Hi, Barbie.
Barbie was the first mass-produced non-baby-like doll, and it paved the way for girls' toys in being a better representative of their autonomy and dreams. And she has since become a huge icon for girlhood. For better or for worse, real or not, Barbie does act as a spokesperson for women and girls' experiences. I bring up Barbie not as a criticism, but instead to address how Barbie, the norm, can compare to Monster High, the other. Barbie's image is unfortunately so wrapped up in that hyper-feminine brand that it's become very one-note, very much a synthesized stereotype of girlhood. It's pink and princesses and bibbles and does not allow any room for diversity within that. Monster High, on the other hand, was making an attempt to create something that opposed this mould Barbie had inadvertently created. The phrase Goth Barbie was often yelled at me to mock or belittle my dolls, but the phrase really does resonate with what those dolls were. Yes, they loved fashion and pink and consumerism. They were first and foremost a product for Mattel, but they existed in an aesthetic alternative to what Barbie had saturated the market into. Goth in both style and the very nature of being other. Barbie provides us with the fantasies of mermaids and princesses, while Monster High sought to bring young children monsters. This switched up the criticism of such characters, such monsters, into something accessible and relatable. Trisha Henry Young has said that Goth juxtaposes familiar items, changing meaning by shifting contexts, and that is exactly what these Goth Barbies did, their heritage and stylistic voices embracing how Gothic is to be other. According to the dictionary, a monster is a large, ugly, and frightening imaginary creature. However, our perception of what a monster or villain is has evolved over the years, acknowledging that the assumption that something being bad equals an ability to connect to audiences is a false one. A 2020 study found that people are most drawn to villains and monsters who share similar traits to them, suggesting that the reasoning for this is fiction acting as a cognitive safety net. This essentially means that people are beginning to view monsters as more than their outward physicality, the freedom of fiction and fandom encouraging a more subjective and personal reflection of their psyche. In short, monsters and villains are becoming more than their exterior differences. Lauren Christie has begun to write about the places monsters have in children's fiction, and I would go as far to say, given my connection to Monster High, that the exposure to child's monsters does nothing but promote acceptance and understanding. The monster as a character has been a key part of Gothic fiction. Take David Punter's example, Gothic stories are where individuals are at the mercy of larger powers, and a prime example of this is Dracula. The German Expressionist movement utilised Dracula on multiple occasions, such as The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and Nosferatu, and James Morgott has directed analysis to the monsters of these films.
With their grotesque villains and stylized sets, Caligari and Nosferatu played on the gloomy artificiality of Gothic scenes of terror.
He notes on Nosferatu's Count Orlok, in contrast, Tom Browning's Dracula, released in 1931 and one of the first of Universal's classic monsters, took a much more human approach. It was praised for craftsmanship, and that craftsmanship can arguably extend to the appearance and performance of Bela Lugosi. With a full head of hair and considered acting choices, Lugosi creates a much more human-like Count. But over time, the studio stopped shying away from getting more creative with their monster designs. Politics and distribution meant that the creators of the films could not fully explore the Gothic narratives that they wanted to, but the monster designs allowed audiences to furnish the films with what the writers and directors couldn't, meaning that they amassed an enormous degree of audience sympathy and even identification. A prime example of this identification is the interpretations of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. In her novel, Shelley gives us the description of the monster through Victor's eyes, a description that certainly presents the creature as a disturbing hybrid, as Cohen would say, but the exclamation of the beauty in his creation also suggests that there is still love from Victor, that there is still loveliness in life. In comparison, Monster High's Frankenstein character, Frankie, appears to have the same look as her father, but a personality that magnifies her grandfather's initial awe in his creation. She is unconditionally accepting and optimistic. To look at Monster High's adaptation, I'm mostly going to be considering Thomas H. Schmidt's analysis of Frankenstein, comparing his account of the impact of the Victorian addiction phenomenon in Shelley's novel to Frankie's child-friendly response to isolation. Firstly, Frankenstein is a tale of isolation, and this is certainly true for the monster, who is ostracized. This attests to Schmidt's observation of the novel's characters demonstrating how the real horror is to be alone. Schmidt justifies his addiction interpretation by insinuating that the obsessiveness of Victor and circumstantial rejection of the creature is on par with the experience of addicts, referring to terminal uniqueness. This mind of thinking, as Schmidt says, makes the experience become more incapable of being heard by outsiders, and the recognition of this sentiment here helps to illustrate that addiction isn't limited to the repercussions of the body from the chemicals, but also the social consequences. As Schmidt puts it, the novel, and others of this period, reflect a dawning recognition of the isolating effects of being dependent.
Of what it feels to be abandoned.
Frankenstein's creature, for all intents and purposes, is a child. He is justifiably dependent on others, but their fear and closed-mindedness of his appearance denies him of this support. When it was time for Universal Studios to adapt Shelley's novel, they compressed its supposedly lumbering narrative, but managed to keep its allegorical feel. And this feel centres mostly around the dejection and heartbreak found from the monster. Obviously, Boris Karloff's performance transformed Shelley's implications, but to ignore the makeup would be a huge disservice. The organic quality that we got humanises his character. He is still distinguished from humans, his build, large handsome forehead, presenting that uncanny look, but more so than anything, his struggles are highlighted. We can now visually see the unjust rejection of him and the dismissal of his natural dependencies. In many iterations, Frankenstein's monster is the victim of a cruel society, but that is not the case for Monster High's Frankie. As mentioned, she is relentlessly empathetic. Being only 16 days old, she is often used within the narrative as exposition. She too navigates the new world just as her father did, but the difference is that Frankie relentlessly rejects attempts at ignorance and loneliness. When her expectations of the world are critiqued or debunked, she goes out of her way to change this. Take Ghoul's Rule as an example. From her magazines, she believes Halloween is a time for parties where normies and monsters celebrate together. And when her friends mock her for this belief, she goes out of her way to make that version of Halloween happen, bringing the normies and monsters together in one last dance, despite their differences. Or Friday Night Frights, where sexism in sport is ultimately overcome, primarily driven by her outright refusal to conform to others' expectations. Schmidt claims Frankenstein's characters will always remain alone and unknowable and terminally unique. But Monster High completely flips this statement on its head, combating these themes by having their rendition be a foil of the popular creature. I've felt connected to Monster High for what feels like my whole life, and I always suspected that it was simply because it was my favourite toy as a child, in the same way I keep buying mermaid trinkets because of Ariel, or follow updates on Justin Bieber's marriage despite not caring about any of his music since Boyfriend. But when I actually sat down and took a look at what was so significant about it, what I really still recognise of Monster High in myself, all I could think of were the echoes of my sister yelling, "Goth Barbie." I've said that Barbie was the original and the norm, and so naturally, I absolutely hated this, because to me, Monster High was so much cooler. The dolls felt not like other girls. It turns out though, as both my genuine, hopefully, maturity and dive into Monster High's actual gothic aspects have shown, that this isn't the case at all, or not in the way that you'd expect. I stand by the fact that Monster High, as it is aesthetically and narratively opposing Barbie, is the other or the alternative. But the idea that it's for a specific type of person, that not like other girl archetype, is completely false. It's a pretty unanimous experience for girls to, at some point in our youth, claim we're not like the others. The patriarchal society seeks to dismiss and belittle our girly interests constantly, and at some point, for a little while, we too submit to that thinking, resenting our femininity. And as I've hopefully shown, the Gothic, its monsters, and its reception focuses on these feelings of isolation, of rejection, and presents the choice to submit to this or to resist. And Monster High, Gothic in its aesthetics and narrative, chooses to resist. It takes the sad stories of the Gothic, dresses it in its deathly costumes, addresses the spurned sets and characters that have connected with audiences for over 100 years, and makes a list of characters who find family and identity in their abnormalities.
You fell over, and I will beat you until you die. Get up! Okay. Seeing as bullying isn't very good.